Global Power and Utilities Leader for KPMG internationally. Jonathan Peacock, Oil and Gas Leader for KPMG. And Matt Kuchra, Partner and Head Power and Utilities for KPMG in UK. So, Anvesha, you have a fantastic panel. Unfortunately, since we are learning a little behind, you have to be all very crisp. Over to you.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Anish, and thanks for always reminding me that I need to be succinct. I'll try my best. It's difficult, as Akhilesh said yesterday, as a consultant. So why we are here today, we've been talking about energy transition, and one of the biggest roadblocks that we have is the extent of investments required. By all estimates, one is talking about 4 to 4.5 trillion per year out to 2050 that we require globally for energy transition. And in fact, KPMG in India did a recent analysis, and we believe that about 300 to 400 billion per year is required by India alone. Currently, we are probably at a 10% of that in terms of our annual investments in energy transition, although I could be wrong, maybe slightly more. So the question is, before industry leaders, that A, how do we get the capital to the extent that is needed and in a very inclusive manner, not only for the largest players out there. B, how do we prioritize? Because that scarce capital, there's a lot of pressures on spending that, and there are a lot of objectives to be met, whether it is ROIs, whether it is climate considerations, whether it is energy needs of the country. So how do you really prioritize? And not only that, within climate-related investments, how do you prioritize between one technology over the other, or between one decarbonization pathway over the other? So today I have a panel of really eminent leaders, both KPMG global leaders as well as India industry leaders, who will be talking about this. But just before that, can I have a very quick mood check from the audience, a Mentimeter, where I would like to ask you whether you believe that climate considerations are being factored in investment decisions by corporates. So very quick one, and while you do it, I'm going to push ahead. We will look at the results on the screen, but I don't want to necessarily wait for it. Please scan the QR code. I'll just wait for like 5 seconds and I'll move on. So Rajarshi ji, I have my first question to you. I think oil and gas industry has a very tough job. At one end, you have to meet the energy security, concerns, the energy requirements of a hugely energy guzzling country. And at the other end, there are definitely pressures on energy transition. And in fact, the former CEO of BP, Bernard Looney, has famously talked about the AND strategy, saying that it cannot be energy transition or energy security. It has to be both, and you have to move towards balance. We would be very curious to know that how are oil and gas companies in India, particularly ONGC, OVL, how are you creating a balance as far as your investments are concerned?
Thank you, Anvesha. Thank you for having me here. Very good question. India today is 88% plus dependent on fossil fuels. The world is at 82. We import about more than 85%, nearly 88, 89% of our oil, about 50% of our gas. It is told that, just like the Honorable Minister just now shared, about 1/4 of all incremental energy requirement will be from India up to 2050. In the world energy basket or consumption, India's share will increase from 16% to a huge 14% in the next 15 years. So in this scenario, transition, yes, I believe that there are only 2 megatrends in this world today. All others are just smaller compared. That's one is the climate change and the associated transition, and other is the AI. So transition has to be there, is there, and it needs to be accelerated. At the same time, can we only do the so-called transition, and what does it mean? Is there only one energy source that can give us a transition? Is it portfolio of energy sources? Is it a basket of energy sources? I do believe all of this will contribute. And as companies like us, like ONGC, Videsh, we are very clear that as the requirement for oil and gas grows in this country, we will need to produce more oil and gas, but yes, much more responsibly, with much lesser carbon footprint. ONGC has reduced its carbon emissions by 17% in last 5 years. This year alone, we have reduced it by 2.23%. Much more needs to be done. That's one part. Second part is, as we spend on oil and gas, we spend about 5 billion on exploration and production in oil and gas in domestic and international, 5 billion plus every year. At the same time, we have set out very ambitious goals by stating that we will spend $12 billion by 2030 with the goal to reach 10 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030 and another 12 billion by 2038, which is our stated purpose for scope 1, scope 2 net zero emissions. So what we want to do is we don't want to cause pain to the consumer as we move towards the transition. First, like I was in a conference last week, and the biggest thing that came out is for us to do transition, first you'll have to produce more energy. The energy pie requirement, India being the big, fastest growing economy, so much of more energy is required. So every energy source will need to satisfy the trilemma of availability, affordability, and sustainability. And then more and more energy is required. So India is doing a lot. And I'll tell you one more important thing is, today we are at about 260, 270 gigawatt of new renewable energy. We plan to go to 450. When the Honorable Prime Minister gave the target of 175, people said it's too much. We achieved that. Now it's 450 by 2030. We should be achieving that. And our NDC targets of COPs also will do before that. But still, we'll need to do more. One more thing that came up in your initial comments, you said 300 to 400 billion requires to be spent on the transition by India. Kindly do remember, for a 6 to 8% growing economy, when it is at $3.75 trillion, moving on to 4, this means less than 1%. And I do believe there is no U-turn for India. India will be contributing this to achieve that target by 2070. The companies will do it faster. The industries, the communities will also need to do as we go along.
Thanks, Rajarshi ji. And I think it's really heartening to know that such ambitious plans are there for renewable energy, even as you are making investments in exploration. So I would turn to Jonathon. Jonathon, you are the global oil and gas leader. Very interested to know, how are you seeing oil and gas industry around the world responding to this challenge?
Thank you, and I could almost say thank you for the introduction. It was a great start, Rajarshi, in terms of describing that. I think if you think about the approaches taken by the different players globally, you would characterise them as converged around acceptance that they've got a role, an ongoing role, to produce their primary products for some time yet, as demand remains strong for those. And the 12 or 13 energy forecast or mixed forecasts I've looked at suggest that'll be the same out to 2050. Where they diverge in terms of their strategies, depending on their geographies and the political context in which they operate, is what business model they use. Do they effectively try and diversify, as some of the European majors have done, into renewables, or do they stick to their knitting, to use an old historical term, as the US majors are doing, focused heavily on how they produce the lowest emission product? But where they converge again, so it's sort of a mixed story, is around an acceptance that in order to continue to produce the products that they do today, as Rajarshi said, there's what I call a ticket to play. And that ticket to play is an acceptance of their role in reducing emissions as much as possible, to make sure that they're producing the lowest carbon output product. If I could probably tell that through one very quick story, I was in Papua New Guinea recently, which is a small nation state to the north of Australia. Papua LNG is a 5.6 million tonne a year project which has just gone to FEED. It has 3 major joint venture partners: Exxon from the US, Total Energies, obviously from Europe, and Santos from Australia. PNG has no discernible ESG policies. In fact, that's one of the areas they're particularly weak. But all three of those proponents, even though they come from very different backgrounds and political contexts, all see and acknowledge their responsibility in light of no policy, footprint or framework around what they need to do from an ESG perspective. So I would say, you know, it's mixed, but it's matched around the things that are critical to oil and gas's role to participate in the energy system in future.
Thanks for that, Jonathon. And let me, go over to Mahesh. Mahesh, you are at the helm of Greenko, and a company which has decided not to take the middle path, but take a completely zero carbon path, and not only for clean fuels, but extending it to green chemicals and green products. What are the challenges that you have faced or are facing in access to capital, and how are you prioritizing capital?
Thanks, Anvesha. I think clearly it's something which we're beginning to understand last couple of years, that what we did last probably 10, 15 years was probably the easy part, which was building renewables, showing PPAs and going to a bank and raising capital. So I'm beginning to understand that, the green investments is different from energy transition investments. And the green investments are probably within the power sector largely, and it's low risk and depending on the market, low to medium returns. The energy transition investments which is power to X and then going deeper into the value chain, and it's more industrial in nature. It's more, it's not infrastructure. It is combination of technology, industrial and commodity play. And energy transition is the capital in that form. Though I've seen a lot of funds marketing energy transition as a concept, in my view, still energy transition is not being understood, and it's more high risk and high return, and that requires the business models to be driven by cost, not driven by offtakes. It's driven by technologies and it's an ecosystem requirement there. It is not like you could procure a few things today. You can't procure electrolyzers from the market, so you have to make it yourselves. So it's an integrated play, a different risk profile, and industrial decarbonization. Industrial emissions are about more than 35% of the overall emissions. And to really transition industrial and make industrial decarbonization work, energy transition involving the molecules and the downstream chemicals, which we are working on, as I said, needs a hybrid of capital. It is not anymore financial capital, because financial capital is too efficient. It's too risk oriented. It's too much driven by what they know, what the data they need to take a decision. Financial capital will struggle. So it has to be a hybrid of strategic, financial, and industrial capital to make the first set of projects work, and that will give data over the next 3, 4, 5 years, and that's when probably the traditional private equities and all can be following later.
Thanks, Mahesh. I think this point that you made about hybrid capital and finding, the hybridization of strategic, financial, industrial is very interesting, and I'm going to come back to you and probe you a bit more a bit later. But let me turn to Shalabh. Shalabh, you're the money man here, and Mahesh has talked about the risks which are related with, energy transition technologies. How are you as IFC and how are the other MDBs looking at channelizing more and more funds given the elevated risks that are perceived in energy transition?
Yeah, thanks, Anvesha. I think one of the previous sessions put a lot of spotlight on MDB reform, that they are not doing enough, and I've attended many seminars over the last couple of months where there's a lot of debate and discussion around it and pushing us that we are not doing enough. So let me tell you what the current thinking is about. And I had the pleasure of interacting with very recently with Larry Summers and N.K. Singh, who are the co-conveners of the MDB reforms committee, and also with our new president, Mr. Ajay Banga of the World Bank. So the current thinking is MDBs put together today are doing about $125 billion of investment every year per annum. lending and so on. There is space on our balance sheet to sweat it out and go up to $175 billion per annum because of all the efficiency improvements and changing the instrument types that can do it. Then there is a lot of discussion around getting more capital, including the hybrid capital that Mahesh talked about, into it so that we can go up from $175 to $375 billion per annum. But that itself is still not enough. It's still a drop in the ocean, but still relative to many other institutions and development in the development financial world, MDB still have a very big role to play with that, assuming we get to $375 billion of leveraging that. Can we leverage, the questions to us is, can we leverage 6 to 8 times that, which means getting to $2 to $3 trillion per annum. And that's, I think, then we are starting to move the needle if we get to that stage. And the way to do that, and this is where we are having a lot of discussions internally with our teams, our governance structure, our execution, is to move more and more towards indirect lending, more and more towards portfolio approach and programmatic approach, so that we come in with risk-sharing instruments, first loss guarantees, partial credit guarantees, and we recycle our capital more and more frequently. So come in, demonstrate projects, recycle the capital, and once it becomes operating, leave it to the market to get commercial funding. And it's been done with the InvIT structures in India, but in many other countries, we are trying to do that. And the last piece is, MDBs can act as trusted agents, which they are doing, but at a much bigger scale of blended finance. And that's when it starts getting more and more interesting. Let me stop here.
So let me turn to Franceli. Franceli, as the global power and utilities lead, you heard the views coming from India on the risks in accessing capital. Shalabh has talked about some of the innovations coming in terms of indirect lending. Your views from around the world as to what are the challenges in accessing capital for energy transition, and do you think that there is enough financing available, and what more can be done?
Okay, thank you, Anvesha. Thank you for joining me here. Thank you. I think it's we have already good tools for investors, but I think one challenge that I still see, especially sitting in Brazil, where I am based and focus on developing countries, I think we still have to improve the participation of the governors in these discussions. I was so glad when I listened today the Minister of India saying that with a good vision about renewables or decarbonization, because when we talk with some local governors, they are still not have a good vision of how to attract those investments, especially in developing countries with huge, massive resources. They must to have a clear view of that decarbonization is not a challenge, but is an opportunity. And with this mindset, they would attract more investment, improving more their regulation, their framework, policy framework, to have more guarantee to the investors. I think I believe that it's the point that we have to invest a little bit more to attract the government to do this fight, to have a clear view what they really need and what kind of tools they should invest to have a better governance.
No, Franceli, you're totally right about the need to have a clear view, because that gives the directional messaging on the investments as well. So Matt, I would like you to come in over here, and particularly I think one topic which is not often discussed, but I'm happy to say that this was, it was mentioned several times today, including by the chairman HDFC, which is networks. We can't talk about renewable energy alone without talking about what Suman said. How do you interconnect grids? How do you make investments there? You need to finally connect the supply to the demand and vice versa. In your view, are there enough investments being made in networks, and what do you see as the challenges?
Thank you. I'm really glad you raised networks because, first of all, they are dear to my heart. Second, they are very expensive, which means that the financing challenge on networks is absolutely massive. Now, if you imagine any kind of jurisdiction, especially ones that is differentiated geographically, where you can get renewables is usually, or not necessarily, the place where you consume electricity, or gas for that matter. So networks have a very critical role to play in enabling energy transition. And they also bring price efficiency because they allow us to generate efficiently in one place and consume in others. Now, the problem we have with networks is that is several-fold. But overall, if I would kind of capture it in one sentence, is how do we build models? And by that I mean frameworks, policy frameworks, and regulatory frameworks that on one hand bring in and attract capital, but on the other hand ensure that the networks deliver for customers in terms of reliability, performance, etc., and also to make sure that the state of the networks is appropriately maintained. And that is a huge challenge and a huge balancing challenge. So we spend a lot of time thinking about models, and you might have heard various, for example, references to RAB models on how to create those models that allow for significant private capital, but also public capital, to come in and deliver networks in an efficient way and maintain them. Now, if you look at the state of networks around the world, the maintenance is a huge issue because in many models, investment is decoupled from ownership of assets and custodianship of assets. Right? So, but in networks, what really is important is how to make sure that we've got sustainable models rather than sporadic bursts of investments. And I think we had that after the war, and now we are coming to a moment where many networks need significant renewals and upgrades. And just to give you one example, in the UK, electricity transmission networks alone will require between 20 and 25 billion investments in transmission electricity alone. So the scale of the challenge is absolutely massive.
Thanks a lot, Matt. So I'm going to get into the second audience poll, and I noted that the first audience poll had a very emphatic no, that they believe that climate considerations are not being factored into investment considerations. So now we would like to understand why. First, we will ask you why, in your view. So if you could quickly scan and answer, because that would help us get the mood of the audience, and then I will turn to the panelists and ask them the question. But before that, while you're doing it, I'm going to come back to Mahesh, because I was very intrigued by the point that he made on hybrid capital. Kind of combining strategic, financial, industrial considerations while raising capital. Mahesh, can you elaborate and guide us on how this can be done and what are characteristics of this kind of a capital?
I think clearly, as we discussed, that the whole net zero goals for the corporates or the countries, I think power-related investments and power as a segment is hardly less than 20% of the energy basket. 2/3 are to do with non-power investments and industrials and oil and gas. I think the non-power market, as I said, has been today operating in a unregulated market. Today there's no regulator for 2/3 of energy India consumes. There's a regulator for only 1/3 of the energy India consumes. It's dollarized, it's not inflation protected. and it's global supply, right? So in the energy transition market, which is key to making the net zero pathways really happen, we have to make progress in the 2/3 basket. This is the power is the easiest part of it. And clearly, that market is commodity driven, so all the base products, whether it's oil, gas, ammonia, chemicals, methanol, ethylene, propylene, chlorine, all of them are commodity based today. And we can't bring in an infrastructure, PPA driven power investor into building, green ammonia, green methanol plants, because the first question they ask is, who's the off-taker? And our point is there is no off-taker because the market doesn't work with off-takes. It works based on cost base. And where are you in the cost base within the country and globally as well? And, in that market, a 2 to 3 year contract is a long-term contract. It's never heard of having 10-year, 15-year contracts. The reason we're working with this hybrid model is, I think, the financing structures will be different. No more will be 80-20, 70-30 structures. It will be more close to 50-50 in terms of equity debt ratios, combined with what controls and on the value chain you can have on the cost base, the cost of technology, the cost of the manufacturing of that product. And all of that is well understood by industrial operators and some strategic players who can take some kind of near-term view, not long-term view. And so that's what we are trying to enable, that bring in all three forms of capital, some to take a view on cost, some to take view on near-term market capabilities and market demand, and then it's a smaller pool of financial capital who will probably learn from these industrial and strategic players, so that the next 4 or 5 years they have enough data to underwrite the projects today.
Thanks, Mahesh, for that. So I'm going to turn to Rajarshi ji. I'm going to ask you, I'm wondering whether you're able to read this. I think the top ones are, Harsh, if you can just... Sorry? Poor returns is the first one, and the second, which has got 14. The second is complexity in adoption, and the third one is financial constraints. So these have emerged as top: financial constraints, poor returns, and technology limitations. So as per the audience, these are the three main reasons why they believe adequate investments are not happening in energy transition. Rajarshi ji, what is your view? Do you concur? And if so, how are you addressing these issues?
First, very knowledgeable audience, and though the responses may seem obvious, but yes, these are the constraints. What are we doing in ONGC? We are clear that we need shorter business cycles. We can't have long gestation period oil and gas cycles of 10, 15, 20 years. That's one. Second is, like your theme is, grow with less. So our theme is do more with less. So we have to produce more oil and gas, but emit lesser carbon footprint. We are hearing from the lenders that if we do not have a ESG strategy in place, then financing is difficult. And the three things that we hear from them is you should have 1, clear targets, 2, you should have budget allocation, and 3, you should demonstrate it on the ground. As I pointed out, we have a target of net zero in scope 1, scope 2 by 2038. We have 24 billion in our budget allocation in first 6 years and then another 6 years. And on demonstration on the ground, we are by organic and inorganic, we are going to go for renewable in a big way. The poor returns thing, at the board level, it's now very clear that renewable project cannot be on the same threshold like an oil and gas project. So we are putting much more economic filters to an oil and gas project. We are putting much more carbon emission filters to an oil and gas project. We are debating, can we do the captive electricity generation through renewables? Can we go to technical flaring of gas only, no other flaring? Can we do some methane emission on the capturing the methane emission on the field itself? Can we go for dual blended engines? So on the financial return parts, the thresholds are different internally for renewable projects, so that we address this concern. We do not have financial constraints as of now. Technology is available. We are quite confident that even with lesser returns than a typical oil and gas project, we'll be able to do this because we owe it to the country, we owe it to the progeny, and at the board level, we are very clear with the support of Government of India that this is possible and this has to be done. As I repeatedly say, there is no U-turn on this. We'll continue to invest in oil and gas more consciously, more sustainably, and more responsibly, and at the same time do aggressive renewable capacity generation.
Thanks, Rajarshi ji, and it's really heartening to know that you have separate set of filters and parameters where you're looking at renewables or traditional oil and gas, because I think that's very much needed. Shalabh, financing constraints are popping out as one of the main concerns. How can we address this through innovations? You spoke about some of the innovations, but if you could go a bit deeper into some of the things you said, I think that'll be great.
Okay, thanks. I think the poor returns and financial constraint, if we have to just bucket it, it's basically weakness in the risk return profile and structures in emerging markets. There was a lot of discussion in the earlier sessions about IRA Act and how good it is. But it also creates a risk for the emerging market, which is where the World Bank and IFC operate in, because we are seeing a lot of flight capital from these countries to US, where the IRA is so strong. So, and India is amongst the largest emerging market countries, and even that cannot compete in terms of the depth of the subsidies compared to the US. So what's the solution? And I briefly touched upon blended finance when I spoke earlier, and there's a lot of confusion about what really is blended finance, and a lot of skepticism whether it can really help scale up. So first, IFC is one of the largest providers or say agents of blended finance. What we have seen in our experience is only 2% of that blended finance is pure grant, which means you don't get the money back. And that's for studies and technical assistance and so on. 98% of that blended finance is returnable capital, which means all the donors want that capital to come back. They provide some concessionality, either by taking more risk, cheaper debt, higher equity risk, different equity returns, etc. So how do you make it count? So blended finance is, we view it as a temporary subsidy given in a sector in a particular geography till such time that the sector stands on its own. It should not be used as a silver bullet of providing left, right, and center in all the sectors and so on. So hydrogen will be a great case for blended finance. The World Bank, along with IFC, has provided $1.5 billion to the Indian government to support that rollout, and that's like a blended finance. So the main thing is, and this is where KPMG and all can also help us, is look at a country and tell us what is the best bang for buck for using this returnable blended finance. How is it best used? How do we sequence it? And is there a road to sustainability in a sector which is clear after providing the blended finance? I can go on and on into this in depth, but in the interest of time,
Shalabh, as a person who's probably 80% of projects today are on hydrogen, I'm so happy to know that financing is around the corner, and I do hope that other MDBs also follow suit, and my team would also be very, very happy. I want to turn to you, Matt. On financing, the challenges or even the challenges on investment that you saw, over there, how are you seeing that globally? Does this resonate, the poll results?
As a former banker, maybe I will say something a little controversial about the financing industry, that it's an incredibly, in some sense, passive industry, right? Because, and the way you put it was actually quite ominous, that you look around and you think, where is a good investment opportunity and how to assess that? But my challenge is, the problem is not in assessing. The problem is how to build the structures that actually can then be assessed, right? So if you look at the results of our polling, I can perfectly imagine a model where we offer good returns, simple mechanisms to the point about complexity, and good attractive investment for financing. And we will get a lot of investment. And the assessment for you will be, for IFC, will be it's a great investment opportunity. The problem is that that does not ensure efficiency, that we cannot, from affordability perspective, offer returns that are excessive. We have to get them just right. And we have to have models that adapt dynamically over time. Because in infrastructure, the assets have very long economic lives. But on the other hand, we have got technological progress and we need efficient market signals. And where I see a particular challenge is in how in many countries, and you know, I include both the UK, India, and many other countries in this, is how to create models that are finely balanced, that are dynamic over time, that offer the best affordability and just attractive returns to bring the cheapest available capital. And then IFC and other financial institutions, their role is to come in, as you say, assess, and assess whether those models are good enough for you to put the money behind them.
Matt, you're a great proponent, and I've heard you speaking again and again about the need for the right models and the commercial frameworks, and then financing will follow. So Jonathon and Franceli, anything to add to the discussion before I throw it open to the audience and allow them also a chance to ask you questions?
The only thing I'd add is investment in decarbonisation, which is obviously the key part of the focus here, is something when you think about the different types of emissions around Scope 1, 2 and 3, I think Scope 1 and 2 for most oil and gas companies is I would say, relatively straightforward, noting that carbon capture and storage is something that needs to be continued to be invested in and the cost of it reduced. And there are some pretty famous stories about the cost blowouts, but I think that doesn't mean it shouldn't be invested in. There's not opportunities. I think where the debate gets really interesting is around Scope 3 and the role of oil and gas companies in whether it's a bit chicken and egg. Do they produce the products first, hydrogen and wait for demand to arise, or is it on the consumer side where you get demand arising from consumers first and then the industry responds? And I know that my clients in international oil companies will say, we're happy to produce the product the market wants. And that creates the duality of a challenge, which is, should I be investing heavily in something there's no market for, or do I wait for that market to evolve and then supply the product? And I think that's where the debate will ultimately reside, is what role do oil and gas companies have in Scope 3 and how do they effectively fulfil that role?
Thanks, Jonathon. Would you like to add anything, Franceli?
Yeah, just to add some thoughts here. I do believe that we still need to, give a zoom and looking for exactly what is the necessity of each country, how can each country can collaborate with each other. I don't think we can see decarbonization as a challenge always. We have to think about opportunities and address exactly what kind of opportunities we have for each country. And for sure, we're going to have investments enough for those countries, and we're going to work in prosperity and not thinking about challenge only.
Great point, Franceli. Rajarshi ji.
Just one thing came to my mind. We have to be very, very conscious that this path to decarbonization, this energy transition has to be different for each country. Again, I will quote from another conference I was there a few days back. There the African nations are telling you want us to transform from firewood to hydrogen. What is it? Where is it? Why should we? So it has to be very clear that it cannot be imposed. Every country will need to develop its own path. Yes, what can be done is a common funding, collaboration, sharing of technologies, and the lessons learned on the path of the nations which have progressed further down this learning curve, so that the other nations which are now starting on that path can do it faster and more efficiently.
Well summarized, I think, Rajarshi ji. Collaboration, learning from each other, and understanding that every country will forge its own pathways. I think these are very important lessons. With that, I'm turning to the audience. Are there any questions? I think we can take a couple.
So I'm Sarthak from Climate Policy, and I'd like to build upon the point that Mr. Shalabh made. A lot of the decarbonization technology that exists in the global north, and measures like CBAM actually force the countries in the global south to transfer capital to the global north, either in the form of purchase of those technologies or in the form of taxation, border taxation that happens. How can that be fixed in a systematic way?
So if I get your question right, is policies like CBAM, how does it create an impact? So I think when we look at hydrogen and we are looking at financing some green ammonia project, the companies here in global south are taking advantage of that where the markets could be for having 2 to 3 year contract, as Mahesh was saying. That's, or somebody was saying that 2 to 3 years is long term in green hydrogen. That's just an example. But the more important thing is, in order for global south to be fully insulated, is development of local capital markets and domestic resource mobilization. It's easier for countries like India, but more difficult for other smaller countries. So what I have seen the World Bank are doing is we have a program called the Joint Capital Markets Program, where we work with government regulators, policy makers in building local domestic capital markets for each country, so that they can cater to the domestic needs without too much relying on north-south flows, etc. Because that ultimately will be critical. And another advantage of domestic resource mobilization is you take away some of the foreign exchange risk that is associated with capital flowing from north to south.
I think there was a hand that side. Yeah.
Charlotte Morton from the World Biogas Association. One of the biggest challenges that our industry faces is that we don't put the right price on things. So most of the value delivered by the biogas industry doesn't get rewarded financially. For example, preventing methane emissions, preventing the pollution that our sewage contains that's going out into the seas and killing the biodiversity in our seas, which will ultimately mean that we don't have a viable planet. How do we change that so that the financial models stack up? We know how to invest in viable projects, but we can't change that pricing. Thanks.
Yeah, please go ahead. Matt, do you want to take that? Or Rajarshi ji?
I can make a quick point and then, I fully agree with you. I think this is one of the biggest challenges, that we don't have the right pricing signals, right? And the right pricing signal, lack of those right pricing signals, which is driven by the fact that there are externalities, which, that's what we are talking about in the decarbonization world, right? Are very significant, very long term, and very spread out. The carbon price, the European carbon price project, isn't working. So we are operating in the world where those price is kind of approximated by local government policies in a very poor and dare I say non-economic way. So I fully agree with you. We have to find a way of appropriately pricing the price of carbon, the price of other externalities. Without that, we won't get the right economic signals. And the more we can do that on a global scale, the better. But it's a massive challenge. And I just want to very briefly to go back to one thing that the minister said earlier, when he was saying that, you can have a market, but you need to help it a little bit. Well, we are all talking about markets by design. And that design is very complex. And that's the challenge of getting the right price.
Absolutely. You measure what you get. If we do not have the right incentives, I think this is an issue. Today, what we are doing in capturing fugitive methane or doing a CCUS project, pilot or long-term, we are doing it as a conscious initiative from our company. But yes, down the line, the carbon pricing is not that much liquidity available. We have carbon credits with us, but that market needs to develop. Probably some VGF needs to come in some of these big projects of CCUS, and some pricing mechanism for carbon pricing is essential.
Yes, Anish, who can stop you?
This is for Mahesh. Mahesh, you started this journey on carbon free, and we are all excited by it. Okay, but it's not an easy journey for sure, because there are regulatory barriers, there are actual genuine price barriers, there are logistics barriers. Is there any particular realization over, say, the last 1 year, which has come to you, which has struck out as something very different from what you thought when you were starting with versus where you are?
I think clearly, of course, we started with the power markets to deliver what we call as carbon-free energy, not carbon neutral, not 100% renewables, not renewable power, right? And I think what really the big contrast I see in my travels, when I travel to Europe and US and all other markets, that I would say today India is the destination to make lowest cost true green hydrogen, not IRA type hydrogen, which is yearly matching and all of that diluted versions. This is truly European standard, at least on a hourly matching green hydrogen. We can even do 15 minutes matching green hydrogen. And that truly is an input source to make, they said the 2/3 of the energy basket carbon free. Right? So when we started with the power, which is 1/3 of the energy basket carbon free, and then once we made hydrogen truly green and at the right economics, then we were able to transition into the 2/3 energy basket and the derivatives that come with that hydrogen carbon free. I think another big trend I've been observing is the last 9 months or so, there was a lot of anticipation of compliance markets, regulatory markets, whether in Europe or other countries, Japan, to really drive these markets to the next phase. But what we're really seeing is the B2B market, where there is increased focus on scope 3 emissions. So every industrial player today has been asked by his B2B customer or a B2C customer to say, hey, what is your, what they call as PCF, the product carbon footprint. I think that's really interesting now that, in fact, most of our accelerated interactions on our hydrogen and downstream products is happening by industrial names who are actually don't have a mandate today, regulatory wise, but their B2B survival of their customer market shares and all of that has been pushed into that direction. So we were speaking to a CEO of a large shipping company, and their point was, yes, their biggest customers like Walmarts and Amazons are asking them to reduce scope 3. So now it's not about price of green transition. Relatively, of course, they want to get the lowest price, but it's about now availability of this carbon-free energy or molecules or products. And then the end game is about every product globally traded will now be measured on PCF, not anymore just on the brand. So brand with low PCF is the right long-term sustainability of that company, no more just brand with high PCF.
I think we can go with one last question before we close. Bharat, yeah.
Yeah, hi. My question is to Mahesh. It's a twofold question, mainly on the commercial and industrial demand, because you made a very good point that finally the costs have to add up and not necessarily the government push. Now, renewables has been cheaper than the fossils, at least for 1/3 of the day. And still, we do not see commercial and industrial demand really picking up the pace at which it should in the last 3 years. So what's the key reason why this has not happened and now it will happen? And the related question is that India still has 40 gigawatts of DG sets. Now that's 30 cents a kilowatt hour power compared to 3 to 5 cents, you look at it either ways. What can be done to really activate that market, which is like very, very easy to crack as long as we get our supply chain right? These two, please. Thank you.
I think clearly, if we have to have, Mr. Gurdeep sir is here, he'll explain that if we have to have a really strong energy market, we should not have DG sets anyway. right? The grids need to be reliable, the energy supply need to be reliable, we need to have all the multi-tier support system there. I think I'm not concerned about digital transition. It's more about for commercial industrial markets, their primary goal is always reliability of energy and the flexibility, right? And renewables could not provide both. They're neither reliable nor flexible. And I think only now the big industrial names which are connected to CTU, who are operating on their captive large coal plants or gas, are transitioning. The smaller segments, or I would say medium-scale industrial commercial markets, they don't have access to probably the high voltage grids at this point. I think clearly the transition in India, at least, as it is very unique, that a carbon-free, renewable, reliable energy today is cheaper than coal, or cheaper than any other energy source they have, at least from the utility of a discom they are buying from. So it is just a matter of time that as energy availability in carbon-free models can reach them, and can in the point of demand they need today, there is a decoupling of the renewable energy generation and the demand the commercial industrial markets have. And so once we're able to solve that bridge, then I think, in our view, another 150 gigawatts of that will be consumed straight away.
Best of luck.
Thank you. And so I think we had a very insightful discussion, and I personally take away a lot of points from here. Some of them I would definitely like to call out. I think the point on the fact that the oil and gas industry needs, to balance, to create that balance and go forward, both on energy security and energy transition are very important. And but yes, I think the aggression on renewable energy needs to be there, and it needs to continue. You need separate parameters to measure or to decide where you're going to invest, and the same parameters cannot apply to renewable energy as to oil and gas projects. And you need a ticket to play if you are going to be in oil and gas sector, and that ticket to play would be to continue forth on your energy transition. We talked about the fact that capital may be available, but you need to have the right commercial frameworks. You need to have the right models to be able to attract that capital and to make it work. So that becomes extremely important. And on the supply side, we heard about the innovation in financing. We heard about hybrid capital, the need to look at capital very differently when you look at infrastructure kind of projects like renewable energy, or when you're looking at power to X, where you're actually getting into spaces which are industrial in nature, when you're looking at green chemicals, etc. So you need to look at capital very differently, over there. We talked about blended finance, and we talked about the fact that MDBs can probably garner about 200 to 300 billion today annually, but what is actually required is probably 5 to 6x that. So, there's a long road still to go. And then finally, we talked about the fact that policy enablers, regulatory frameworks, and a clear directional mandate from the government is above all extremely important for the right investment signals. So with that, thanking my panel, I think, thank you for your time and for the excellent discussions. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So now, after 2 fairly busy days, but very, very enriching, if I can be corny, days. We are coming to the last session. And we have a fantastic panel.